Jose Antonio Vargas had a successful career as a journalist, including a job at the Washington Post, where he shared in a Pulitzer Prize for the paper's coverage of the Virginia Tech shooting. But in 2011, Vargas came forward with a secret he couldn't keep any longer. He is an undocumented immigrant.
I come to you as one of our country's 11 million undocumented immigrants. Many of us Americans at heart, but without the right papers to show for it.
Since then, Vargas has produced a documentary about undocumented immigrants in this country, testified in front of Congress about the need for immigration reform, and is currently co-teaching a class and holding events at the University of Oregon. Vargas joins us tonight to discuss his story and his views on immigration in America. From KGW News, this is Straight Talk with Laurel Porter.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight for Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. Jose Antonio Vargas may be the most famous undocumented immigrant in the country. Living in the Philippines, his mother wanted a better life for him, so she sent him thousands of miles away to live with her parents in Northern California. They were naturalized American citizens. Vargas didn't find out until he was 16 the green card he had was a fake. He was in the country illegally, and he kept that secret for years, eventually becoming a well-known journalist. But in 2011, he revealed the truth in an essay he wrote for the New York Times Magazine, My Life as an Undocumented Immigrant. Since then, he's made 2 documentaries and has become an immigrant rights activist. I'm pleased to welcome as my guest tonight, Jose Antonio Vargas. Thank you for joining us here on Straight Talk.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been speaking to groups, you've been teaching a class at the University of Oregon. How's that been going?
Well, I'm really thankful for the Wayne Morse Center. They were the ones that asked me to come here as a visiting chair of sorts. It's been amazing. There's actually a class at the University of Oregon called Define American, how mainstream media coverage of immigrants impact our perception of immigrants. There's a graduate student named Mariko Plesia who's been teaching it, and it's been awesome. It's been great, not only meeting students, but meeting a lot of immigrant rights activists all across the state.
I want to dig into some of the current issues, but first I want to hear more about your backstory, which is fascinating, and how you came to this country. It was 1993, you were 12 years old, and a man you thought was your uncle, you would later find out was something called a coyote, smuggled
He was the smuggler that smuggled
into
me
this
here.
Country. Your grandfather paid quite a lot of money.
$3,400.
Wow, to get you here.
For a security guard, that was a lot of money.
Do you remember that, or do you know how you were smuggled into the U.S.?
No, I mean, I remembered, of course, being on the plane because it was my first ever plane ride. I'd never been on a plane before, and I think maybe I was so excited about the whole airport plane thing that I'm Filipino. We have big families, and so when my mother said to me that this guy was my uncle, everybody's an uncle, right? So, okay, sure. And when I got to America in 1993, you know, I was excited to live with my grandparents, and I thought everything was fine. And I'm really proud that I come from such a welcoming community. I grew up in Mountain View, California, where Google is at. And so I thought everything was fine. It wasn't until I went to the DMV to get a driver's license that I found out that the papers that my grandfather had given me, including the green card, was fake. And you know, I remember the first thing I thought of when the woman at the DMV said it was fake, I thought, I'm not Mexican. Because, you know, as a 16-year-old, I had internalized this whole narrative that immigration is about the border, it's about Mexico, it's about, right? And so my name is so Latino because of Spanish colonialism in the Philippines. I just thought maybe the woman thought I was Mexican, right? And the woman was like, I don't care what you are, this is fake.
But you kept that secret for
a
number of years, and you wrote about that later in the New York Times Sunday magazine about what that was like, keeping that secret. You said you tried hard to be a model American, and I'll read part of your essay. You said, but I'm still an undocumented immigrant, and that means living a different kind of reality. It means going about my day in fear of being found out. It means rarely trusting people, even those closest to me, with who I really am. It means keeping my family photos in a shoebox rather than displaying them on shelves in my home so friends don't ask about them. It means reluctantly, even painfully, doing things I know are wrong and unlawful. And it has meant relying on a sort of 21st century underground railroad of supporters, people who took an interest in my future and took risks for me. What sort of things did you find that you had to do wrong or that were unlawful in keeping your secret?
Getting a driver's license. That was, when the Washington Post said, we want you to be an intern for us, they said, you have to have a driver's license. And I hadn't gone to the DMV since I found out that I was here illegally. And I spent a whole day researching how to get a driver's license and found out that the state of Oregon.
So you came here?
I came here in 2003. And that happened because of what you just said, the Underground Railroad of supporters. My high school principal, my high school superintendent, the son of my high school superintendent's secretary was the one who drove me all the way from Mountain View up here to Portland to get a driver's license and learn how to parallel park in Pioneer Square. And that license was valid for 8 years. If it wasn't for that license, I would not have gone to the Washington Post. I would not have been able to have a job, writing for the New Yorker. Those things would not have happened. So I wonder, as we're sitting here, how many other U.S. citizens are doing what my principal, my superintendent, all of my mentors did for me.
And one of your mentors helped you get a scholarship for college to San Francisco State University. You went on to become an accomplished journalist. You worked for the Washington Post, where you were on the team that won the Pulitzer Prize covering the Virginia Tech shooting. But then in 2011, you wrote an essay for the New York Times Sunday magazine where you revealed the truth.
Yeah.
What motivated you to go public with your secret?
That didn't happen overnight. I've been thinking a lot about it. I actually started thinking about it when I was a political reporter covering the 2008 campaign. I thought about it really hard when I met Mark Zuckerberg. I was profiling him for the New Yorker, and at one point Zuckerberg turned to me and said, "Hey, Jose, where are you from?" And where I'm from is, I don't talk about where I'm from, right? I lie about where I'm from. And here I am. I had, checked off everything on my list that I thought I needed to do to be successful. I had done all of them, and I was still lying. So it was either I leave, because I thought about that. I thought about, why don't I just leave? If you all don't want me here, if this country says that it doesn't want us here, why don't I just leave? But then, I started thinking about gratitude, right? Like how grateful I am for the community that I come from, right? I come from a place where all of these people did really not know who I was, but they provided a place for me to be supported, to be encouraged, right? And I think that gratitude really led to the creation of, DefineAmerican.com, which is this organization that we have, which is all about how do we talk about this issue and bring more people into the conversation.
What were the consequences when you revealed the secret? Was there any kind of backlash, or did life change
I actually
at all?
thought, as a journalist, I thought it all through. I thought, okay, so they're going to show up at my house, they're going to arrest me. I thought of all of the consequences. What I did not prepare for, frankly, was silence, right? That year that I outed myself publicly, the Obama administration deported 400,000 immigrants in 1 year, right? So clearly, this is not the Trump era, and so we don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. There's a lot of, I can't believe there's actually somebody on Twitter the other day whose Twitter handle is Deport Jose Now.
Do you live in fear that that's going to happen?
No, I mean, look.
But you have been detained once,
I've been detained once, yeah. So, look, being detained and being deported, I had thought about that. I had prepared myself for that. The biggest fear is just not using whatever resources and means and privilege I have to speak out, right? And to insist on the complexity of this issue, and to speak out for many, many people who cannot. There's 120,000 undocumented Oregonians in this state. Right? Your economy, 25% of the agricultural economy depends on immigrant labor, right? There are many undocumented students in high schools and colleges across the state. So how do they feel at home? Do they feel like Oregon is home? Like, what kind of culture are we creating in the state so that undocumented Oregonians feel safe in the very place that they call their home?
A lot of people who were undocumented joined you on the cover of Time magazine.
Yeah,
that followed an essay that you wrote after the one in the New York Times Sunday magazine. And the cover says, "We are Americans, just not legally." You consider yourself, even though you're not a citizen, to be an American.
Well, yes. And this is why we have an organization that's literally, a question mark, right? It's Define American ? So being American, is it purely defined by pieces of papers? Is that it? Does the law get to bestow that? Like, you know, there are many people who are Americans simply because they're born here. Okay, is that it? Right? Like, what are we contributing? You know, like, how do we exist beyond ourselves? Right? I'm actually in awe of undocumented immigrants, and again, the undocumented Oregonians in the state who get up every day, right, and drop their kids to school, you know, go to work, pay taxes, because we pay taxes and contribute to Social Security, all knowing that the government doesn't want us here. The resilience of that, to me, is incredible.
There are a lot of people who would ask, and you have been asked this, even you talked about it in the Time magazine essay, why haven't you become a citizen? You've been here how many years now and you still are not a citizen? Help people understand why you're not a citizen yet.
Yeah, so that's actually one of the things that's been very, very clear to me now in the past few years, is that we don't know anything about this issue. It's amazing how much we talk about it, yet how little we know about the processes. And as a journalist myself, what's been astounding is the lack of knowledge within journalists themselves about the immigration process and how it works, right? So that's why there's 11 million undocumented people in this country who cannot adjust their status. We can't just like show up at City Hall, fill out a form, bump somebody off a line, and poof, we're Americans stealing your welfare. It doesn't work like that. Right? If someone like me with resources and privilege and means can't adjust my status, how do you think those other people who can't?
Is there any way that you can become a citizen?
That's why we need immigration reform, whatever that is. That's why we need a DACA policy. That's why we're trying to pass a DREAM Act. There's no way, right? But the fact that the average American doesn't know that, the fact that, you know, anti-immigrant groups, right? The fact that our own president continues to spill lie after lie, deception after deception about immigration and about immigrants ourselves is astounding to me.
What would you say to people who say, by your definition of being an American and not being a legal citizen, it would open the floodgates? Anybody could come to this country and say they're an American. Where do you draw the line?
Well, I would ask them, if they're not Native American or if they're not African American who was brought here through slavery, how did they get here, right? So to me, the question that every American, especially white American, must answer is, you know, where did you come from? How did you get here? Who paid? We're in the state of Oregon, right? The history of the state, excluding people who get to go to the state, all those people that came to this state and created it what it is, you know, what papers did they have? When people 100 years ago going through Ellis Island, what visas or green cards did they have? Was there a border patrol? No, there wasn't, right?
But do you think anybody should be able to come across the border?
No, absolutely. Every country has a right to define and defend its borders. Absolutely. I actually think it's irresponsible for us as a country to not know who's here, right? Like, I, as a Washington Post political reporter, the fact that I was on Hillary Clinton's campaign plane and the Social Security and the Secret Service didn't figure out that I was here illegally, like, right? If we want to really fix this issue, we have to know who's here. That's why we need people to come forward, right? Get themselves into the process and have a way to not only legalize themselves, but become U.S. citizens.
Jose, you testified before Congress a few years ago during the Obama administration, and you had a number of people with you, some of your entourage, family, friends.
The very people that helped me get a driver's license in the state of Oregon.
And get your scholarship. Let's listen to what you said 4 years ago.
Across the country, there are countless other Jim Strands, Pat Hylands, and Rich Fishers of all backgrounds who stand alongside their undocumented neighbors. They don't need to see pieces of paper, a passport, or a green card to treat us as human beings. This is the truth about immigration in our America. And this Congress, as this Congress decides on fair, humane reform, let us remember that immigration is not merely about borders. Immigration is in our blood, part of our founding story, writes Senator Ted Kennedy, a former chairman of this very committee, in the introduction to President Kennedy's book, A Nation of Immigrants. I carry it around with me.
Fast forward 4 years, there was no immigration reform that year. There still isn't. What do you want to see happen with the new administration? Do you have any hope that we'll see immigration reform?
Given how divided and partisan this whole atmosphere is, I think all politics is local. What I would love to see is every state and every city and every community and every school district determine for themselves, how do they define who an Oregonian is? That really gets to the question of who's American. Like, who do we consider to be our neighbors, right? Are we willing to face the reality and the facts that they are a part of our communities? What kind of sanctuary are we providing for people, right? I mean, the economy of this state wouldn't survive without immigrant labor, many of whom are here without papers. We have to face that fact and grapple with it.
You're trying to change the conversation about immigration policy and humanize it?
Because we can't really, you know, of course I want immigration reform to happen, but laws are made by people. If we don't treat people as human beings that they are, no amount of piece of legislation is going to matter.
And one of the ways you're trying to reach people is through documentary, and you have a documentary called Documented that screened in Eugene and Portland last night. Let's take a look at a clip from your trailer.
My grandfather decided that he was going to get his grandson to come to America. One morning, my suitcase was packed. I was 12. It's been 18 years since I've seen my mother. So I'm launching a whole campaign about what it means to be an American and the fact that I am an American. There are 11 million undocumented people in this country. In 2010, undocumented people paid $11.2 billion in state and local taxes.
My name is Erika Andiola. I'm from Colombia.
From Nigeria.
From Brazil. I'm an undocumented immigrant from Germany.
We mow your lawn. We work at your houses. Maybe we're your doctors. Maybe we're nurses. We're not who you think we are.
So undocumented people are not who we think they are. Who are they?
Well, I think everything about immigration is about families and what families are willing to do for each other. I mean, that was the, you know, I'm fascinated right now, by the way, about Irish immigrant history. I didn't really know much about it. I didn't know that after the potato famine, you know, they called them coffin ships because so many people died on their way here, right? So they got to America, and then when they got here, all those newspaper ads saying no Irish need apply, right? Like, so how did that happen? So how did the Irish and the Germans and the Italians, all these people, that laws were created to ban them from being, you know, coming to certain places. So all those Irish, Italian, German people now, who by the way are just white Americans, do they remember what their own history is and the parallels of what's happening to them and what's happening to us? You know, today actually is the birthday of my sister in the Philippines.
You have not seen her for years.
So I can't leave because if I leave, they won't let me back in. President Clinton signed, you know, a law that would basically institute a 10-year bar, right? A bar from someone like me to coming back, right? So this has been a bipartisan mess, Republicans and Democrats. So I can't leave. My mom is on a waiting list to come, right?
And you haven't seen her for how many years?
So 12. I was 12, so 24 years. My sister, I was there when she was born. And I left when she was barely 2, and she's 26 today. So thanks to Facebook, you know, Facebook, Skype, that's how we keep in touch. But you know, like, I'm privileged enough to tell you that, but I've heard of so many stories of people who their parents die, you know, in Guatemala, in India, and they Skype the funeral.
Oh my goodness.
Because they can't come. But isn't it amazing that technology, information crosses borders and continents, and yet people can't? What are we doing? Why are we doing it?
Jose, we need to take a break, but we're going to talk more after the break and talk about DACA too. We'll continue our conversation with Jose Antonio Vargas after the break. We're back in 2 minutes.